Restoring Men in History, inspirational story. We're doing one battle today. John Paul Jones, hero, fought in the American Navy, called the father of the American Navy. And of course, you've heard some famous lines of his. He's quite famous. Says, boys, we loved John Paul Jones. We're going to give you the actual account, 1874, from the famous naval battle of the British frigate Serapis and the Battle of Flamborough Head, all right? Now, what we learn in this: resilience, courage, massive on both sides, the British and Americans, the men, not just John Paul Jones. And what can you learn and take from this so it can offer you some value? Now, I found it exciting, this account. And I found this account for you back from 1874. So I hope you find it as exciting as I did. And as a boy, I always thought, God, it'd be great to be John Paul Jones on the ship. So, and now when you read this account, probably when I was 10, different take on it today. It's wow. So what will this show you? It'll show you what men faced in battle, and I think that's worth hearing. What they went through face to face, ship to ship, when they boarded ships, when they got on. A very dynamic and exciting battle. Captains facing captain. And both of these captains, Captain Preston on the British side and Captain John Paul Jones, were both terrific commanders. So you got to see two great commanders in action against each other. Very experienced British commander and captain, and the experienced John Paul Jones. A lot of brave men on both sides, the British and the Americans. And I think you can get something from this for value from your life of going on, of never quitting, of never giving in. You've got to be able to learn to face obstacles and adversity like John Paul Jones, like Captain Preston, and go on. And it also shows you can overcome against a superior force, with worse resources. So let's go into the account here. Battle on the North Sea on coast of Yorkshire. So on the morning of September 23rd, 1779, this is where our battle is going to take place on that date. He gave a big chase to a brig which appeared at some distance to the windward. Remember, they're looking through looking glasses at this point. I've read another account of this where he was looking and discovered this. At noon, while engaged on this chase, a large ship appeared coming round the head. Captain Jones had seized both of the swift-sailing pilot boats. One of them set in pursuit of the brig. Vengeance he sailed in chase of the ship. The ship ran for protection in Burlington Bay. So he had a feared reputation, John Paul Jones. Now, this battle, when it occurs, people can see it from the coast they watch, which is also interesting. Far away in the north of Flamborough Head, a fleet of 41 merchant ships. This is like fantastic news to John Paul Jones. He's been waiting for this. He's wanted his moment to do something for the American cause and glory. And back then in those days, these heroes, some of them sought glory, and he sought glory and honor. He wanted it. He wanted this fight, and he's going to get it. It was very certain that a fleet would be not without a strong convoy. Captain Jones immediately signaled back the pilot boat. He also hung out the signal for a general chase. As soon as the fleet discovered the squadron bearing down on them, that it was the terrible Captain Jones, the merchant ships, like frightened pigeons, crowded all toward the shore. There were 6 vessels composing Captain Jones' squadron, but you're going to see in this battle they take off. The Richard, the Alliance, the Vengeance, the Pallas, and the 2 pilot boats. It was soon found that John Paul Jones was going to get what he wanted: 2 ships of war protecting the merchant fleet. Now, this is a big deal to Americans. These 2, the Serapis and the Countess of Scarborough, 2 of the most strongly built and best armed of the English frigates. This would be an incredible victory for Americans if John Paul Jones can win this and stay in the fight. Even though his ship's not as good, it's not as fast. So he's going to have to use his mind and creativity to beat this, and courage. They came forward for battle. Captain Jones made the signal for all his ships to form in line of battle. Crowded all sail to reach the enemy as soon as possible, for night was at hand. Captain Landis paid no attention to the signal. 7 o'clock in the evening, Bonhomme, Richard, and the Serapis approached within hailing distance of each other. And this is interesting. I found this just fantastic. Listen to this. The Alliance stood sullenly aloof from the conflict. The Vengeance, for some unexplained reason, remained far off and did not come in action. So Jones doesn't have the guns of the Serapis. She had been commanded to assist in any way she could, or in destroying the merchant ships. The Pallas, under Captain Conty, bore bravely on the Countess of the Scarborough. The Richard had how many guns? 40 guns. 6 of these were 18-pounders. So you're going to look at it, 18-pounders. The rest were 12, 9, and 6-pounders. Richard Bonhomme. That's the ship that John Paul Jones commands. So that is the American ship, okay? By the way, who was it named after? Franklin. The whole weight of iron balls she could throw at one discharge of them all and was 474 pounds. So think about that. They can throw 474 pounds at you. You're going to be able to see it. Cannonballs coming at you. Serapis carried 41 guns, but get the difference here. 20 of these were 18-pounders. There were 325 men to work these guns. So it took, think about that, 325 men. The whole weight of metal the Serapis could throw one was 600 pounds. So Jones is outgunned, right away. And the Serapis, the story tells us, was what? One of the finest British frigates. Much better than the Richard, which was an old and clumsy merchantman, very unwieldy, poorly fitted for war. There was a little breeze which swelled the sails and an almost unrippled sea. The sun had been set for more than an hour, but the moon rose in full splendor, shining down from a cloudless sky. The vessels were but 3 miles from the rugged cliffs of Flamborough, which seems a short distance. Those cliffs were blackened. Coastline of Scarborough was crowded with spectators. They were going to watch this. Now they had approached either very slowly, within pistol shot and abreast, now bow to bow. The Serapis held the Richard with one question they had to identify back in those days. What ship is that? The answer came back, what is it you say? John Paul Jones was clever. The longer he could get closer was better for him. He didn't have the firepower. Again, the shout came from the Serapis. What ship is that? Answer immediately, or I shall fire into you. Simultaneously, both vessels opened fire. The flash glared upon the spectators like lightning. Then came the thunder. Storm of human passion, more dreadful than any storm which ever wrecked the skies, had begun. The battle was on. Iron tore through the ship. Now imagine being there. You're in the ship. It tore through both of the ships, crashing the tender. Now, what else happens when that happens in a ship? Splinters go everywhere. And strewing the decks with the mangled bodies of what? Dying dead all around already. At the beginning of the battle, you see men die right in front of you. Remember, at first discharge, 2 of the 18-pounders of the Richard burst. So already lost 2 of the 18-pounders that rapidly, killing almost every man who served them and blowing up the deck and creating havoc. It made the other 4 useless as well. So they've already lost that. Thus, Captain Jones' battery of 6 18-pounders were rendered entirely useless for the rest of this fight. They're gone out. His adversary had 20 18-pounders to hurl destruction upon the Richard. The battle continued with fury. Broadside followed broadside in such swift succession that there was a continuous flash and a continuous war. Imagine the noise to your ears and seeing your friends drop, your mates drop. Now there was a big cloud of smoke going, so you got to also fight through the smoke. Some of the spectators said they were overwhelmed with awe and dread. Now each was endeavoring to cross each other's track. Thus the opponent might be raked by the broadside, which was sweep from the bows to the stern, but several of the braces from the Richard were shot away already. So the Richard was already having great trouble maneuvering with the helm. It was in trouble. Serapis was thrust across the stern of the Richard. Captain Jones grasped the bowsprit with his grappling irons and made the ships fast. The stern of the Serapis swung around to the bows of the Richard. Thus the ships were now square alongside each other. They were entangled. In fact, they were so close the muzzles of their guns often touched. Gunners were pouring into each other at that close distance. Several 18-pound shots pierced the Richard at the water's edge, and then the water was coming in through the openings. Party of 20 soldiers. Now this is something unique that Captain John Paul Jones did that all commanders didn't. He had been placed on the quarterdeck of the Richard to pick off gunners in the enemy. Now I had read an account that Nelson really thought that was dangerous, the British commander. But anyway, John Paul Jones liked to do it to give them extra firepower, and he was willing to take the risk. It's a riskier move. But they were assailed by such a murderous storm of grape shot that, torn and bleeding and leaving many dead upon the deck, they ran below. Men were stationed high up in the rigging of the booth of the ships and kept incessant fire on the exposed persons. Captain Jones' battery of 12-pounders, on which he had placed his main reliance, was soon entirely silenced. Broadside answered broadside. Captain Jones saw that the superiority of his enemy in weight of metal would give the enemy the victory. He had to do something. That mode of warfare was over for John Paul Jones. His vessel was old. It was shot up. The Serapis was new. Timbers, he said, were almost like ribs of steel. So what was John Paul Jones going to do? He decided to board her. And back in those days, they would board you. With his own hand, Captain Jones aided in tying the lashings that the vessels might not be again separated. Still, there was not a moment's cessation of the cannonade. Timbers were torn. Things were flying. Huge gaps were opened in the side of each ship. There was a cloud of smoke which enveloped them, so dense in almost the midnight darkness, fought mainly by the flash of guns. So dark, smoky, all you see is this flash of guns. John Paul Jones, 100 men made a rush over the gunwales into the Serapis, the British ship, with gleaming swords, exploding pistols, and the loudest outcries. And they would cry when they go over sometimes in those battles. Blood, terror, shrieks. They were met by an equal number from the foe, with pike, saber, pistol, and corresponding yells. What do you think of this? What's your imagination like right now? Midnight darkness, only illuminated by war and flashes. Smoke everywhere, people dying, blood. Thundering, deafening the ears. Limb torn from limb. Dead bodies now were all over the decks, and they were slippery with blood. Shrieks, groans, prayers were heard. John Paul Jones' his boarders were driven back, leaving many dead upon the deck of the Serapis. They were forced pell-mell over the gunwales, with many a gory wound to the blood-stained decks of the Richard. As they fled, the two captains stood within a few feet of each other. That's amazing, right? These two captains. And that's the amazing thing about these old battles, when you look at the Navy battles and other battles back in old times. Face to face, captain to captain. It is quite interesting. And I don't know if you've seen that movie with Russell Crowe, but it's quite interesting how the captains maneuvered against each other. Commander and Masters, the name of the film, was based on a series of books. So, John Paul Jones and his men are beaten back. His ship's in a horrific condition. What would most captains do at this point? At that time, you could also surrender. There was a gentlemanly thing of warfare still going on with ships, and you could surrender to the other side on ships. So he could have surrendered. So Captain Pearson of the British yells out, "Have you struck your flag?" Because they couldn't see, the smoke's everywhere. "No," responded Captain Jones. And here it is. This is really why we're doing this. Here's where the famous line comes from, the myth, the legend of Captain John Paul Jones that we loved as boys. "No," responded Captain Jones to Captain Preston, captain to captain. And in one of the most famous lines in American history, John Paul Jones then added this, "I have not yet begun to fight." John Paul Jones was calm and unagitated, watching every movement. Though blackened with smoke, he was also painfully wounded by a splinter. By the way, Captain John Paul Jones was about 5'5", they said. He tried to compensate for the lack of superiority of the gun by rapidly firing his own. His gun became heated, and they threatened to break from their fastenings. At every discharge, by the way, the ship trembled, stern to stern, so all the men felt that. Captain Jones said this, "I directed the fire of one of the three cannon against the mainmast with double-headed shot, while the other two were exceedingly well served with grape and canister shot to silence the enemy's musketry and clear her decks, which was at last effected. The enemy were, as I've since understood, on the instant for calling for quarter, when the cowardice or treachery of my three under-officers induced them to call to the enemy. The English Commodore asked me if I demanded quarter, and I, having answered in the most determined negative, renewed the battle with double fury." So what are you seeing here? Never give in, never give up. John Paul Jones just keeps going. Think about this. There were 6 feet of water in the hold. The flood in streams was rushing in. The ship was apparently sinking. At that awful moment, one of the officers rushed below with humane intentions, released 300 prisoners who were in the hold. They came pouring up on the deck. I mean, about everything's going wrong here. Water would have drowned them in the hold. Bullets and cannonballs would strike them on the deck. The Richard was on fire in several places. It was leaking. Would Jones quit now? And I think you can take this for life or anything. Are you going to go on when everything like this is breaking down? Rudder was cut off from the stern frame. Again, fire in not just one place, but several places, the story says. It was burning within a few inches of the powder magazine, and the flames were so near the magazine that Captain Jones ordered the powder kegs to be brought up and thrown into the sea. He made the prisoners work on the flames to try to extinguish it, because if the ship goes down, they go down with it, right? Now, the battle, get this blood, the smoke, everything that you've heard, the battle raged on for 2.5 hours like this. Captain Jones never giving in, never quitting, never giving up. Now, Captain Pearson thought he heard the cry of someone on board for Richard calling for quarter. This probably came from the quartermaster. Hearing this, Captain Preston writes, I called upon the captain to know if he had struck. See, they can't see each other. No answer was being made. After repeating my words 2 or 3 times, I called for boarders and ordered them to board, which they did. Now the British are boarding Captain John Paul Jones' boat. Paul Jones had been crafty. When they got over, people were lying under cover with pikes in their hands, and they were ready for them. The powder boys of the Serapis, whose business it was to bring up the cartridges for the guns, appalled by the horrible scene, dropped everything on the cartridges on the deck and went back for more. These cartridges were trampled on, and there was more death. The deck was soon covered with cartridges and loose powder. A hand grenade is thrown from the Richard to set this on fire. It produced this big explosion. The effect was horrible. Killed 20 people, were instantly blown to pieces. Many had every particle of clothing blown from their bodies. They were thrown down. There was agony. They were crying out. They were blackened. They were scorched to cinders. Captain Pearson says this, a hand grenade being thrown at one of the lower ports of cartridge was set on fire. The powder, the flames of which, running from cartridge to cartridge all the way, blew up the whole of the people and officers that were quartered. This is what's going on. Just before 10 o'clock, the Alliance, which had stood aloof, made her appearance, and she just charged into the Bonhomme. So things are really going on. So they're supposed to be on John Paul Jones' side. They're with him, and they're firing on him. Everyone cried out, "You're firing on the wrong ship," but they couldn't hear. Now, at this point, fire from the tops of the Richard had struck down every man on the quarter deck of the Serapis. Captain Jones' guns had cut the main mast of the foe so that it reeled and fell with a fearful crash, tearing down with it spars and rigging, leaving the ship a helpless wreck. Flames were bursting forth in several places on the Serapis. Captain Pearson now saw that all was lost. With his own hands, he struck the flag. So we can do more of John Paul Jones. This was the most famous battle, I think, for him. Man of courage, resilience. His men had courage and resilience. The British had courage and resilience as well. And what does it show you as you go through life? When life hits you, when obstacles are chasing, get up in the morning and say, like John Paul Jones, don't quit, don't give in, keep going. And say this to yourself in the morning, I have not yet begun to fight.